A little girl in a pink frock whispers, "Please help her." A millionaire in a gray suit drops his briefcase and runs into the street. A woman lies motionless on the ground. No one knows the truth behind this accident, or that this moment will change everything. Stay with us, because what happens next will break you, then heal you. Before we dive into the story, please tell me, where are you watching me from, and what's the time there right now? Tell me in the comments, because I read your every single comment. Outside the towering glass building that scraped the clouds and shimmered like cold steel in the sunlight, two little girls stood hand in hand, Emma and Emily, 8 years old, wearing shocking pink frocks that fluttered gently in the breeze like tiny flags of innocence waving for attention in a world too fast to notice. Their golden hair glowed under the afternoon sun, neatly tied in ribbons that matched, just like everything else about them, from the way they shifted their weight to the way their eyes scanned every face walking through the building's massive revolving doors. The building belonged to power, to money, to a world where no one expected to see children waiting on the concrete steps, clinging to each other as the hours stretched longer than they should. Their mother, Sarah, worked inside, as the personal secretary to the famously unreachable and coldly brilliant millionaire CEO James, a man whose name was whispered in boardrooms and admired on magazine covers but rarely spoken with warmth. Sarah had said she'd be out in 10 minutes, that she'd bring them muffins from the cafe downstairs, maybe a warm hug too if the meeting didn't run too long. But 10 minutes had turned to 20, then 40, then a full hour, and the girls, still hopeful, remained glued to the spot, not because they were told to wait, but because they knew she would never leave them behind. Pedestrians rushed past, barely sparing a glance. They were late for meetings, answering calls, texting, surviving, but never stopping. No one asked why two delicate little girls stood outside a skyscraper alone, watching the glass like it might open into magic. A few passers-by gave half-hearted smiles, some looked away, but none paused long enough to hear the ache in their silence. Emma held her head high like she'd seen her mommy do when she was tired but refused to show it. Emily traced a finger over a wine, crumpled drawing in her pocket, 3 stick figures holding balloons under a bright sun, her sister, and their mother smiling in a park. They'd planned to go there after mommy's work. They were supposed to have ice cream. They were supposed to laugh. "Maybe she's coming down now," Emma whispered, mostly to herself, trying to hide the way her lip trembled at the edges. Emily said nothing but leaned against her twin, trying to feel steadier. Their shoes, polished clean this morning, were now dusted with the gray of city life, and the lace on Emma's frock was unraveling where she'd been fidgeting. A few feet away, a man in a navy suit paused, looked down, then walked on, eyes pretending not to notice, heart pretending it wasn't stirred. The twins didn't mind. They weren't begging, they were waiting. They knew their mother. They trusted her. She'd never forgotten them before, even when she had to skip meals, when she worked late, when she came home with tired feet and a smile too heavy to lift. She always chose them. They were her world. They knew it. "She said she'd get us hot cocoa too," Emily murmured, her voice as thin as tissue, barely strong enough to exist. Emma gave her a nod, blinking fast. The wind picked up, swirling a few leaves around their feet, but they didn't move. Behind them, through the glass walls, they saw people moving like shadows, suits and heels, conversations that never looked down. "Maybe her boss gave her more work," Emma said, trying to sound like she understood. "He always does." Emily frowned. "He shouldn't," she said softly. "She's already so tired." Emma didn't reply. She remembered last night, Mommy rubbing her temples and saying, "Just one more file, girls, then we'll have movie night." But the movie never happened. Sarah had fallen asleep on the couch, pen still in hand. The girls had covered her with a blanket and kissed her forehead. That's how much they loved her. And now, they waited, not because they were afraid, but because they believed. Still, each minute that passed began to feel heavier, like time was thickening. The world was dimming slowly. The sun wasn't as warm anymore. The shadows stretched longer. A mother with a baby stroller slowed beside them, concern in her eyes. "Are you okay, sweethearts?" she asked. "We're waiting for Mommy," they said in chorus. "She works inside." The woman nodded, smiled awkwardly, and walked on, just like all the others. Emma watched her go, heart sinking a little deeper into silence. "She's never this late," she whispered. Emily was counting cars again, silver, red, black, blue, trying to distract her mind from what was beginning to feel wrong. "Maybe she forgot," Emily said suddenly, looking away, ashamed. Emma turned sharply. "Don't say that," she replied, but her voice cracked. Deep down, she had asked herself the same question, and that scared her more than anything. The wind lifted again, and a small paper cup rolled across the sidewalk. Emily's eyes followed it, then looked up at the building again. Nothing. No familiar figure, no soft perfume in the breeze, no warm voice calling out, "There you are, my stars." Just more strangers, just more nothing. The sky had begun to tint orange as the day leaned into dusk. They had missed lunch, their feet hurt, but they stood their ground. Because that's what love does. It waits. Even when it aches. Even when the city forgets. Even when the world passes you by. Emily leaned closer. "Emma." "What? Why is Mommy taking so long?" And in that one question, asked with trembling lips and wide blue eyes, the world suddenly felt too big. Emma looked into her sister's face, then toward the building. Her hand tightened, her voice stuck, and for the first time today, she had no answer. Emma stood frozen, unable to respond to Emily's trembling question, as her wide eyes stayed locked on the revolving door, which finally pushed open with a soft whoosh that made both girls straighten with sudden hope, their tiny hearts skipping in unison at the sight of a familiar figure stepping through. Sarah, their mother, radiant even in exhaustion, holding a small paper bag, her tired face breaking into a warm smile as she spotted her girls waiting patiently where she left them, and just as she raised her free hand to wave, as her lips parted to call their names with relief and love, the screech of tires split the street like a scream, and time, so cruel, so calculated, folded in on itself. A black car came from the corner like a shadow born of madness, engine roaring with careless speed, its glossy surface reflecting sunlight and ignorance all at once, and Sarah barely turned, barely reacted, barely lived the second between calm and chaos before the metal beast met her body with a crack that silenced the world, hurling her off her feet as if she were weightless, sending the muffins flying into the air like broken promises, her form tumbling like a doll struck by fury, limbs flailing until she crashed against the sidewalk with a sound so sickening that even the birds above seemed to fall silent. Emma screamed, raw and sharp, a sound that ripped out of her chest as though her soul was trying to follow her mother into the street, while Emily, paralyzed by what her eyes had just witnessed, tore away from her sister's grip and ran, her legs unsteady, her arms outstretched, collapsing beside her mother's crumpled form with a faint cry of, "Mommy!" before her knees buckled and her body folded, falling beside Sarah with eyes still open but glassy, her consciousness stolen by the shock that shattered the innocence of a little girl who had only wanted muffins and love that day. The black car didn't stop, hesitate, didn't even look back. It turned the corner and vanished into the noise of traffic as if it had never existed, as if the pain it caused didn't echo in the screams it lay left behind, and still no one moved, not at first, not fast enough, not with enough urgency, as though the crowd itself was stunned by the suddenness, too overwhelmed by horror to act, clutching phones and briefcases but not their compassion, some gasping, some frozen in disbelief, their eyes wide and hands hovering helplessly as if reaching out might make it unhappen, and amid the chaos stood Emma, her scream now a breathless gasp, her body unable to move forward, stuck between two worlds, the world where her mother waved and smiled, and this new one, where her mother lay in the road, motionless, face hidden beneath strands of blood-streaked hair, one shoe flung yards away, the paper bag crushed beneath her body like forgotten joy. Emma's feet inched forward, one step, then another, her hands shaking as her voice broke again and again, "Mommy, Mommy, please." But her knees gave in before she reached her, collapsing beside Emily, wrapping her trembling arms around her sister's unconscious body, sobbing into her golden hair, unaware of the red that was starting to seep near the curb, unaware of the ring Sarah always wore now bent and buried beneath her fingers, unaware of the growing circle of onlookers whispering but not acting, filming but not saving, their pity coming too late for courage. A man in a gray suit nearby dropped his coffee in horror, but still didn't step forward, and a woman gasped, hand over her mouth, as if that would help the blood stop spreading, as if that would bring breath back to the mother who moments ago had just been smiling. The silence grew heavier, as if the city itself was ashamed, as if time had stopped to ask itself what kindness had become in a world of noise and indifference. And then, slicing through the horror, a single voice rose above the stillness. Not panicked, but commanding, deep and urgent. "Call an ambulance!" it shouted, and heads turned toward the source, a figure striding out from the building, eyes wide with disbelief, footsteps accelerating into a run, tailored suit flapping in rhythm with rising panic, because sometimes, fate chooses the most unexpected moment to crash two lives together, and this moment had just found its witness. As the shout for help echoed across the stunned silence, James stepped out of the revolving doors, adjusting his tie absently, then froze mid-step, his breath catching like a fist to the chest. His sharp gray tailored suit gleamed beneath the midday sun, but in that moment, all its polish felt meaningless in front of the twisted body lying near the curb. Sarah. The woman who'd brought him coffee every morning, who never once missed a day despite her tired eyes and soft smiles. The same woman he'd barely looked at beyond formal pleasantries. Now she was sprawled motionless on the concrete, her blood mixing with the dirt of the street, while a little girl in a shocking pink frock knelt beside her, screaming a name over and over, Emily. And next to them stood another girl, her lip trembling, her blue eyes wide and wet as she reached for him, tugging his sleeve with tiny desperate fingers. "Please help her," she whispered, her voice so soft yet it pierced deeper than any scream. James's heart clenched in a way it hadn't in years. Without hesitation he dropped to his knees, the concrete scraping his skin as he gently scooped the unconscious girl into his arms, her small body frighteningly limp. His hands trembled, not from panic but from something older, something buried, guilt, humanity, a forgotten softness. He looked at Sarah's face, pale, streaked with blood, and then at the terrified child still clutching his jacket. "Emma?" he asked quietly, realizing how many times he'd heard Sarah mention their names but never cared enough to remember. Emma nodded, too stunned to speak. He could hear sirens now, growing low, but in that stretch of waiting, time slowed to a crawl. James loosened his tie, brushing Emily's hair gently back from her forehead as she whimpered faintly in his arms. "She's breathing," he murmured, a strange relief washing over him. Emma collapsed beside her mother, sobbing softly into Sarah's coat sleeve, and James placed a reassuring hand on her back, steady and warm. People were still standing in stunned circles, watching from a distance as if tragedy were a performance they couldn't interrupt. The driver was gone, the license plate a blur in James's mind, and rage flickered beneath his grief, but it was quickly buried by the overwhelming urgency in front of him. "It's going to be okay," he said, not knowing if it was true, but needing to believe it, for the children, for himself. The paramedics arrived, prying through the small crowd, their voices sharp and practiced as they took over. "We need room, step back," one shouted. James didn't let go of Emily until a medic gently lifted her from his arms. Emma clung to his leg now, not in fear, but as if she'd chosen him in that moment, as protector, as the only stable thing left. "Can we go with Mommy?" she asked through hiccuped sobs. James didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'll take you there myself." He followed the stretcher, Emma's tiny hand in his, while the crowd slowly dispersed, already moving on. But for James, nothing was the same. Every click of his shoes on the hospital floor would later echo like guilt down a hallway of regret. Yet in that moment, as he helped the nurses fill out Sarah's emergency forms and watched over the girls like they were made of glass, something in him cracked open. Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but because those girls were no longer just someone's daughters, they were his responsibility now. He wasn't their father, not by blood. But something inside him whispered he had failed them before this day, and this was his moment to change that. So he sat with them in the waiting room, his expensive suit stained with dust and blood, his phone unanswered in his pocket, his body, room far behind him, Emma curled up beside him, head against his arm, and Emily slept inside the hospital room with wires attached to her chest. He had a company to run, meetings scheduled, deadlines, investors, but none of it mattered now. He stared at the ER doors and promised silently, "I won't let her die. I won't let them be alone." The girls needed more than a CEO. They needed someone who cared. And for the first time in years, James found something worth stepping down for. James looked down at Emma, her tiny fingers clutching his suit sleeve with desperate innocence, and something inside him shattered like glass under pressure, something he had spent decades burying. The fear in her eyes mirrored a reflection he hadn't dared revisit in years, and the world around him suddenly blurred into a quiet storm of sirens and sobs. He gently lifted Emily into his arms, her little body limp and fragile, her curls sticky with tears and dust, then reached down and picked up Emma, whose heartbeat thumped against his chest like a pleading knock on a long-shut door. As the crowd thickened and murmurs grew louder, James didn't wait for protocols or formalities. He turned toward his sleek black Mercedes, opened the back door, and with a quiet urgency placed the girls inside, his hands trembling not from panic, but from something far older and buried: memory. The ambulance sped ahead, red lights slicing the evening haze, but he tailed it with unblinking focus, knuckles white on the steering wheel. The city lights flickered past like ghosts from the past, and his mind drifted to a night much like this, except it had been him on the sidewalk, a young boy watching his mother cry out for help after a hit and run. No one had stopped. No one had cared. He had held her hand as her warmth faded, yelling for help that never came. That night had built the man he was now, calculated, closed off, untouchable. But this moment, this wasn't business, this was raw. This was life unraveling in the back seat of his car. Glancing through the rearview mirror, he saw Emma clutch Emily's hand, whispering prayers through sobs, and a knot of guilt twisted in his chest like a blade. He had built skyscrapers from stone, but failed to build walls strong enough to keep humanity out forever. As the hospital came into view, he pressed the accelerator just a little harder, parking recklessly outside the ER entrance and leaping out, shouting for help. Doctors and nurses swarmed around the gurney that carried Sarah, and soon they lifted Emily from his arms. But Emma didn't let go. She held tightly onto James's hand, her little fingers anchoring him in a storm he didn't understand yet couldn't walk away from. Inside the hospital, the white fluorescent lights felt colder than the night, and the sterile smell clawed at old wounds in his memory. A nurse approached briskly with a clipboard and tired eyes, giving James a once-over. Expensive suit, sharp jawline, unfamiliar warmth in his touch, and then looked at the two girls beside him. Her voice broke the silence like a needle against skin. "Are you their father?" And in that single question, time stilled. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because for the first time in years, he wished he was. James stood frozen for a second, the nurse's question echoing like thunder in his chest. "Are you their father?" His lips parted, but no sound escaped. Instead, he turned slightly and looked at Emma, her tiny hand gripping his as if he were the last familiar thing in a collapsing world. Her big blue eyes met his, pleading, scared, but trusting, and something within him cracked so loudly it felt like his own ribs had split. "She's all we have, sir," Emma whispered, her voice so small yet piercing enough to silence the entire corridor. James blinked rapidly, kneeling down beside her, brushing a golden strand of hair from her tear-streaked face, feeling the strange yet undeniable weight of responsibility drape itself over his shoulder. Ours like a forgotten coat, rediscovered on a stormy day. As Sarah remained inside, unconscious and pale, machines keeping her tethered to life, James refused to leave the girl's side, sitting stiffly on the waiting bench, his tailored gray suit wrinkled, his phone buzzing endlessly with unanswered calls. He sent one firm message to his assistant: cancel everything, indefinitely. For the first time in years, profit margins, stock prices, and boardroom wars didn't matter. Two trembling girls curled beside him on a vinyl bench meant more than any empire he'd built. Nurses walked by, whispering softly, casting glances filled with curiosity or judgment, but James didn't care. He only watched the door to Sarah's room, every beep of the heart monitor behind it pulsing in rhythm with his own regret. Hours crawled by. Emily stirred in her sleep, her head resting on James's lap, and he instinctively placed his palm on her back, feeling her tiny breaths rise and fall, anchoring him to this unexpected moment of fragile humanity. He didn't ask himself why he cared. It was a question he already feared the answer to. When a doctor finally emerged with tired eyes and hesitant words, James stood before he spoke. "She's alive, but critical," the doctor said. "And," he paused, looking toward the girls, "she has no medical insurance. She won't qualify for state coverage for weeks, and if her condition doesn't improve quickly—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Emma, listening from the bench, wrapped her arms around Emily as though afraid someone would rip her away. The doctor continued, softer now. "If she doesn't regain consciousness soon, the girls may be transferred into the foster system." That word, foster, hit James like a brick. He'd heard it before, lived it, survived it, but barely. He remembered those long, cold nights in unfamiliar houses, the aching silence of strangers pretent, ding to care, the sharp sting of rejection wrapped in smiles. He clenched his jaw, eyes narrowing not with anger, but with a decision. He strode past the girls for a moment, toward the window at the end of the hallway, staring out at the city lights that once meant power, now just flickers in a storm of uncertainty. His fists balled at his sides, the pressure of old wounds and new truths meeting in his chest like a firestorm. He didn't care if this derailed his schedule, shattered his reputation, or invited questions he wasn't ready to answer. He turned around slowly, walked back toward the bench where Emma now sat with Emily in her lap, both looking at him with eyes full of unanswered hope. He didn't smile, he didn't speak, but in that moment he became someone they could lean on. And then, after a long breath that tasted like conviction, he walked back out toward the front desk, past the curious stares, past the expectations of what a CEO should or shouldn't do, and when he stepped outside into the cold night air, he didn't hesitate. He clenched his fist, looked up at the sky, and muttered through gritted teeth, "Not on my watch." James stood motionless in the hospital hallway, the words, "Not on my watch," still hanging in the air like thunder trapped between clouds, his clenched fist slowly unfurling as if releasing decades of restraint and unknown emotions. He turned swiftly, his polished shoes echoing with urgency down the sterile corridor, past nurses and families, past hope and fear, until he reached the elevator that would return him to the only place that could offer him answers, his office. The city outside continued its rhythm, horns honking, screens blinking, but James no longer heard any of it. His world had narrowed to two little girls in pink frocks, and a woman lying unconscious in ICU. As the elevator doors slid shut, he leaned against the wall, trying to suppress a storm rising inside, memories, questions, and an ache he couldn't yet name. When the doors opened to the top floor, he didn't greet his assistant, didn't nod to the staff, just marched into Sarah's small office tucked beside his own, now a silent museum of a life hidden in plain sight. The desk was modest, her chair still warm, a coffee cup half full beside a sticky note that read, "Pick up girls at 5. It stabbed at his chest. With shaking hands he opened her bottom drawer, rummaging through files and receipts, until his fingers brushed a worn envelope, creased at the edges like it had been carried and reconsidered countless times. His name was on it. James. Just his name. No title. No formality. Just a whisper from the past inked in blue pen. His throat tightened as he slid a finger beneath the seal, the air thick as he unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's. Steady, honest, vulnerable. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you face to face," it began, and already his vision blurred. She spoke of their final fight, of how he left without knowing she was carrying not just a child, but two. "I didn't chase you because I was afraid. Afraid you'd hate me, afraid you'd say they weren't yours, but James, they are. They're yours. Our daughters." His knees gave way and he collapsed to the floor, the carpet suddenly a battlefield where his heart waged war with every regret he had buried beneath ambition. He pressed the letter to his chest, his suit wrinkling as his breaths grew ragged, and the office seemed to spin in a whirl of memories. Sarah's laugh, the warmth of her hands, The way she once said he'd be a great father someday, and now, he was. Already, without knowing, without trying, without deserving. The faces of Emma and Emily flashed in his mind, Emma's teary eyes, Emily's unconscious body cradled in his arms, and he realized the connection he'd been feeling wasn't accidental, wasn't imagined, it was blood, it was legacy, it was his. He crawled closer to her desk, searching for more, photos, anything. But there was nothing else, just that letter, just that truth. He rocked gently, whispering, "Oh my God," again and again, as if repetition could dull the blade that had pierced him. Then, finally, the words escaped in a tremble, not of fear, but awakening. "They're mine." The realization shattered him, not in pain, but in overwhelming love and guilt fused together. For years he had chased power, closed himself off, ruled from a throne of solitude. And all along, two little hearts had been beating with pieces of his own inside them. His entire identity shifted in that one breath. No longer just a CEO, not merely a millionaire, but a father, a man who had unknowingly abandoned what mattered most. He stood slowly, folding the letter with reverence and sliding it into his inside pocket, closer to his heart. His reflection in the office window was no longer the man who walked in earlier. It was someone raw, broken, and utterly reborn. He looked toward the skyline and muttered, "I'm coming, girls. Daddy's coming," as the city below carried on, unaware of the legacy rewriting itself above. James's breath caught in his throat as he sat crumpled on the cold office floor, the letter still trembling in his hand like a ghost from a life he abandoned. The weight of lost time pressed against his chest like a tidal wave of regret. "They're mine. All this time," he whispered again, eyes wide with disbelief and heart drowning in the realization. His past mistakes weren't just haunting memories now, they had names, faces, tears, and tiny hands that had unknowingly reached out to him all along. With fire in his eyes and guilt clawing at his throat, he rose to his feet and bolted from the office without grabbing his coat, ignoring the shouts of his assistant behind him. Rain had started to fall as if the heavens themselves mirrored his ache. He jumped into his car and raced through the city streets, tires screeching at turns, the letter clutched tightly in one hand like a promise too long delayed. His mind raced faster than the wheels, Emma's innocent smile, Emily's fragile bow, Dee in his arms, the sound of Sarah's name on their lips. He burst through the hospital doors like a man possessed, heart pounding with the urgency of a father who had just realized he'd lost 7 years of holding his daughters. At the ICU desk, he didn't wait to be acknowledged. "Sarah Lane, which room?" he demanded. The nurse, startled by the authority in his voice and the tremble in his eyes, pointed silently. He didn't thank her. There was no time for manners when a lifetime was hanging by a thread. He pushed open the door and stood still, breath stolen again, but this time not from pain. Sarah lay there, still as porcelain, fragile as glass, but alive. Machines hummed and beeped, tubes snaked from her fragile frame, and the soft rhythm of hope pulsed in the quiet room. The girls looked up from the bedside. Emma was holding Sarah's limp hand, lips pressed against it in silent prayer, while Emily rested against the pillow, eyes puffy but awake. When they saw James, they didn't move at first. There was hesitation in their gaze, uncertainty. Could they trust him? Was he truly here for them or just the drama unfolding around them? But then James took a knee beside the bed, arms wide open, his voice soft as a prayer. "I'm not leaving again. Not now, not ever." The hesitation broke. Emma stood first, took one step, then another, and then she was in his arms. Emily followed, clinging to his sleeve like it was the anchor to her storm. He held them both as if his soul would shatter if he let go. "I didn't know. I should have. I'm so sorry," he whispered, pressing his lips to their hair as tears slid silently down his cheeks. They didn't need perfect words, they just needed to be held. He called in every favor, every contact, and every dollar he could throw at fate. Within an hour, Sarah was moved to a private, state-of-the-art suite reserved for the elite. Floral wallpaper, sunlit windows, plush seating, and a recliner for each child transformed the cold clinical environment into something close to home. Specialists were flown in, Nutritionists were briefed. Night nurses were hired. No expense was spared. To the world, he was the CEO of a billion-dollar empire. To two little girls, he was finally becoming dad. Not by name, but by presence. He brought the girls home. To his home. The penthouse, once filled with silence and solitude, now echoed with laughter, clinking cereal bowls, and small footsteps down marble floors. He converted his office into a princess-themed bedroom, pink curtains, twin beds with fairy lights, and shelves packed with every book they'd ever dreamed of. He'd once built skyscrapers to touch the sky. Now he built pillow forts to touch their hearts. On the first night, he found them asleep on the same bed, holding hands even in their dreams. He sat beside them, brushing a golden curl from Emily's forehead, whispering a promise that had come 7 years late. I may have missed the start, but I'll be there for every chapter from now on. The next morning he took time off from every board meeting, ignoring calls and emails. Instead he packed lunches, braided hair, badly, and waited outside ballet class like any ordinary dad desperate to reclaim what he'd never known was his. Paparazzi tried to snap photos when word got out that the elusive CEO was now parenting twin girls, but he didn't care. Let the world know, he was proud of what mattered. Each evening, they returned to the hospital. They told Sarah stories. Emily read her bedtime books. Emma played lullabies on a tiny keyboard James had bought. Nurses watched in awe as the once cold businessman softened with every tiny moment, but the ache in his eyes never faded. He wanted her to wake up, to see what he was doing, to feel what he'd learned. One night he sat alone beside her bed, holding her hand for hours. I was blind, Sarah. I was stupid and selfish. I thought I needed power, but what I needed was already right here. You. He reached into his pocket, stayed and pulled out the letter again, now wrinkled and water-stained. You gave me a chance even when I didn't deserve it, and now, I'm not wasting this one. Suddenly, a soft knock came at the door. A doctor stepped in, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable. James rose immediately. Is she okay? He asked, voice steady but desperate. The doctor glanced at Sarah, then looked back at James and the girls. There's movement in her fingers, he said slowly. Silence fell over the room like fresh snow. James turned back to Sarah and saw it. Her right index finger, barely visible, twitched again. Emma gasped. Emily covered her mouth. And James, he fell to his knees, overwhelmed. She's coming back, he whispered, eyes flooded with hope, hands trembling not from fear, but from grace. The doctor's voice cuts through the heavy silence, and all three, James, Emma, and Emily, freeze in stunned stillness. James stares at Sarah's pale hand on the bed, eyes glued to the slight tremble of her fingers curling ever so faintly. Emma gasps and clutches his leg, whispering, Is that Mommy waking up? Emily leans forward, eyes wide with cautious hope, as if daring to believe what she just saw. James quickly presses the call button, heart racing like a storm inside his chest. Doctors and nurses rush in, carefully assessing the subtle signs of consciousness. A nurse gently places a hand on Sarah's wrist, then nods. She's responding. She's fighting. James falls back a step, his knees trembling, hands shaking as he watches the woman he once lost find her way back. Emma starts to cry softly, while Emily reaches up and wipes her sister's tears with a shaky smile. See, she whispers, Mommy's magic is still here. Sarah's eyelids flutter, her breathing deepens, and her head shifts gently to the side. The room holds its breath as the mother they feared gone, slowly blinks open her weary yes. James instinctively steps forward, voice breaking. Sarah, it's me. James. Sarah blinks again, groggy, but her gaze finds him. The confusion on her face shifts to recognition, then disbelief, then an overwhelming rush of emotion. Tears gather in her eyes, trailing down her cheeks in silent waves. She looks at the girls, both clinging to James now, then back at him. Her lips part but no words come yet. James walks to her bedside, falls to his knees and gently places his forehead on her hand. I'm so sorry, he chokes out, for leaving, for not knowing, for everything. His tears wet her skin, mingling with the warmth returning to her fingers. Sarah, weak but conscious, shifts her other hand and slowly raises it toward the girls. The girls rush forward, gently clambering onto the bed as nurses step aside to give them space. "Mommy!" they cry in unison, voices full of laughter and sobs. Sarah gathers her strength and opens her arms, fragile but full of love. Emma tucks herself into the left side of her chest while Emily snuggles into the right, fitting perfectly like two halves of her heart. James watches them, his heart both shattered and whole at once. Sarah turns her gaze to him, and despite her pain, a soft smile forms. With a cracked voice, she whispers, "You found them, and me." He nods, unable to speak, overwhelmed by the weight of that truth. "They're everything," he finally manages, "and I will never walk away again." Sarah looks at the girls, then back at him, eyes softening. "Then come back not as a savior, but as their father," she murmurs. James leans closer, voice firm yet tender. "That's all I've wanted, from the moment I knew." Sarah's hand finds his, their fingers intertwining like two paths finally converging. The girls look up, tears still on their cheeks, but smiling now like sunshine breaking through a storm. A nurse watches quietly, then whispers to another, "Sometimes healing comes from more than medicine." Later that afternoon, Sarah is stable enough to move into the sunlit private suite James had prepared for her. He carries her gently in his arms, the girls skipping beside him in their mismatched little shoes. They settle her into bed together, tucking in corners like a sacred ritual of care. Emma places a flower on the side table, one she picked from the hospital garden. Emily draws a tiny crayon family on a napkin and places it beside Sarah's pillow. James watches them both with awe, as if discovering joy for the first time. Sarah rests back, looking at the three of them like they're her answered prayers. By evening, the doctors clear Sarah for eventual discharge in a few days. But James won't wait. He arranges a comfortable long-term care nurse to help at home. He signs paperwork to transfer full responsibility and guardianship temporarily, keeping the girls close until Sarah recovers. The girls wrap around him like ivy on a tree, no longer afraid, no longer alone. And then, the day comes. The final hospital doors part like curtains to a new stage of life. James stands tall, suit slightly wrinkled, but heart restored. In his left hand, Emma walks proudly, pink frock fluttering. In his right, Emily beams, yellow dress catching the light like hope itself. Sarah, still fragile, walks beside them, supported, but radiant. The sun breaks through the clouds above, casting gold over their silhouettes. They walk together, slowly but surely, as one whole unit, hand in hand, soul in soul. James glances down at each daughter and smiles. They look up and whisper, "We knew you'd help her." He kneels, kissing each forehead gently. "No," he says with a trembling voice, "you helped me." The doors close behind them as they step into a new life, not perfect, but finally together. A family found, not by chance, but by fate that refused to give up. And in the distance, as they drive away, a once lonely penthouse waits, about to be filled with laughter, drawings, bedtime stories, and love.